Hey you guys, welcome to Critical Thinking, your very first lecture for chapters 1 and 2. I'm your instructor, Professor Vitt. This is Philosophy 11. You've got my email address there and also the Long Beach City College logo through which you're taking this course. We're looking at the starting photo. We're looking at a picture of Eastern State Penitentiary in Pennsylvania, and it's actually famous for being haunted, but it's important for us for another reason, which is it kind of symbolizes it is a prison, right? A penitentiary is a prison, but for us it symbolizes in a way where some of us are right now. We're very good at fooling ourselves, and we're very good at keeping ourselves from the truth. So we sort of have this tendency to put ourselves in prison, and the goal of this course is to help us get out of that. So why don't we move ahead and start talking about the focus of this whole class. What is critical thinking? Critical thinking is really thinking about thinking, and we're going to be focused on how to think properly. Now, you'll sometimes hear a word called metacognition, and that's probably an accurate statement about what critical thinking is, but all that you're really saying there is that you are going to think about how you normally think. And we want to know when we're thinking critically whether or not we're making errors as we think. Sort of like in a way you might think about an athlete. When you become a professional athlete, it's no longer enough that you are really fast or really strong. You have to know the fundamentals of the game in order to play well, because everyone has a certain natural aptitude. And if you don't know the rules of the game, you don't know them well enough, then you will fail. So thinking is kind of like that. You can be really smart, but if you're not thinking properly, then you're just spinning your wheels. You're not getting it done. And that does happen to people. They can be incredibly bright, very, very smart. In fact, being smart in that way is usually bad for critical thinking because you're very good at justifying and rationalizing things. The way that we do this in this course is we study the paranormal. And what we'll do is we'll look at some of these cases involving the paranormal, and then we'll look at how we normally think about them. And that will help us to study how we think and to teach us to think properly. Now, the paranormal is just a fancy name for something that violates the laws of physics, or really the laws of nature, what we know about matter and energy and how they work. So that would be the laws of biology or chemistry. And it's a little bit easier to give you some examples of what something that's paranormal is. And that might make more sense of this definition for you. But ghosts would be a great example of what paranormal is. Famous ghost hauntings. Ghosts have been around with humans as long as there have probably been humans. We've had ghost stories, or something like them anyway. At least that we can tell from recorded history. Psychics, people who claim to be able to read your thoughts and so forth. That would be a paranormal experience because we don't normally think people can do that. If someone can read your mind, wow, that's something that normally people can't do. They can't see what's going on inside of your head. Now, I included Bigfoot here, but Bigfoot's not really an example of the paranormal. He could be, depending upon which camp of the Bigfoot universe you're in. In other words, there are some beliefs that involve Bigfoot that are paranormal, but usually it's just a branch called cryptozoology. But what it shares with paranormal thinking is that we don't know. We don't really think there's a Bigfoot out there. It could be. It would be a big surprise to us. And in that sense, it's similar. Alien visitation from another planet, not necessarily paranormal, but definitely one of those beliefs that'll be good for us to look at and help us understand how we think. The same would be true for astrology. That'll be very illustrative to teach us how it is that we think about things, how we see patterns, how we reason from evidence. And then I have a little 9/11 clip art there, and that's just to talk briefly later about conspiracy theories. So we will delve into that because it's a form of thought, or it can be anyway, that helps us to understand mistakes that we make when we're reasoning and the things that we do right when we reason. And what all of these cases have in common is that they involve, oh gosh, how do I put it? They involve cases where the world that we think we're seeing is wrong. And when you want to test your thoughts, when you want to test your theories, you want to look where they're wrong, not just where you're right. You want to see where you got it wrong so that you can correct yourself. So in that sense, these are perfect examples. Okay, so why would we study critical thinking? Apart from what we're going to study, subject matter-wise, why would you do this? Why would anyone sign up to do this? Well, you're always thinking on some level, subconsciously or consciously. You're always thinking about something. So anything that you do frequently, you should ensure that you do it well, right? Why else might you study this? By the way, these are all good questions for the test. Well, how you think influences the decisions that you make, and the decisions that you make influence the quality of your life. So if you're able to think properly about certain medical claims or certain political claims, then you would make decisions that affect your life. So if you're thinking about medicine and you're well informed and you make a very good decision about your own medical care, that could lead to a much higher quality of life. And so on and so forth. So these examples could be multiplied many times over. If you make the right decision when you buy a car, you're going to be paying less for the car and it's going to be lasting longer. And so critical thinking would help in that regard. Then there's also this general idea, why else would you study critical thinking, that you want to maximize the true beliefs that you have and you want to minimize the false ones, right? That's what I want. I want to know that the stuff that I believe is true, and I want to keep my false beliefs, of which there are probably many, to a minimum, right? I want to keep operating over here with piling up my true beliefs and minimizing my false ones. Some other points, why else would you study this? Well, lots of people believe in paranormal entities or powers or beliefs. I mean, they stick around. 28% of the general populace, this is according to our book, believe in some form of superstition or witchcraft. Up to nearly half believe in ghosts. 12 to 52%, that seems like a pretty darn big range there, believe in fortune-telling or psychic readings. A lot of them believe in scientific parapsychology, which is a very fancy name for something like demonstrating the paranormal under rigorous scientific conditions. And then another large portion of people believe in aliens and monsters, so extraterrestrial entities or monsters of some kind, whether that means the chupacabra or the Mongolian death worm, who knows? But so it's definitely, it's definitely an area of popular belief that is pervasive. It's common, and so it's worthy of study there. And then there are some what ifs, right? As if you didn't need any more reasons to study critical thinking, I'm going to give you just a few more, which is that if some of these paranormal claims are correct, physics and astronomy and chemistry and biology could all be wrong, right? If it turns out tomorrow that we can isolate some compounds that are associated or with ghosts, right? If we can come up with some kind of tangible evidence for ghosts, that might tell us something about the relationship of the human body to the human mind. And so that would have ramifications for biology and so forth. Additionally, our own, if people do have some of these paranormal powers, then our own view of what we're capable of as humans is radically different. We're able to do more then, and that should be recognized. They could help us if we were psychic. It could help us in different, making the right decisions, like choosing the lottery or the proper lottery numbers or something, or just knowing which car is going to last the longest and be the best. We could use our psychic abilities to find missing people if they are if someone is psychic. We could use the powers for that reason. And then lastly, of course, archaeologists could locate hidden treasures. There are lots of hidden items of antiquity and so forth that we would love to have for their cultural value, if not their financial value. And if we had someone who could see things without, if they had sort of a second sight and they could locate objects without seeing them directly, then that would be of great use to us. Okay, why don't we move on here to our course outline. We're going to look at sources, and then I thought there was a, no, okay. We are going to look at sources, so where a particular claim comes from. That'll be the first thing that we consider, so that'll be Chapter 3. Then Chapter 4 will be a study of logic. We're going to be concerned with whether or not assertions are properly founded, whether or not there are contradictions, validity, soundness, strength, cogency, and so forth. So we'll look at whether or not something is logical. And then we will concern ourselves with whether or not the claims are based on observations that are, how do I put it, observations that are good. And by that, what we mean is observations that are that take place during very specific conditions, so that we don't fool ourselves. Right? We're really good at fooling ourselves when we don't look at something in a systematic way. And then the latter part of the course is going to be looking at alternative explanations for some of these paranormal claims. So we'll look at oddities of nature and the world of numbers, all sorts of perceptual errors that we can make, and any tricks that we might be subject to. We'll look at explanations that involve errors of our memory. In case I forget to tell you this, remind me that our memory is very bad. Ha ha ha, that's a joke. Our memory is actually deplorable, but our belief is that it's pretty good, but it's actually not. It's a big surprise. We'll look at placebo effect, and then we'll also discuss sensory anomalies or hallucinations. So when I say this is the outline of the course, what I really mean is, in the future, when you encounter a paranormal claim, what you're going to do is you're going to evaluate the source of the claim, the logic of the claim, any observation on which the claim is based. Then we're going to look for alternative explanations in this way. So hopefully that outline kind of makes sense and is helpful. But that's going to be how the course will go. If it doesn't make a lot of sense, don't beat yourself up on it. It'll make sense as we go through the course. Okay, now we're just going to do the pocket survival kit that is found, I believe, in Chapter 2. I'm just going to explain it because it's kind of like thinking on the run. You know, we don't have time to bring the whole thinking kit, but I'm going to give you guys a mini version of it right now, and hopefully these principles will be of use to you as you employ them throughout the course. Okay, the survival kit consists of two things, and they're really three different things, but we'll start with the first one here. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. The next two we will cover in just a couple of slides. All right. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. This is actually a principle that we use every single day, so it won't be too awkward for you, but let me show you how it works. Oh, we are missing, here we go. Let's suppose, I apologize, we have a slide out of order. Let's suppose that I take a claim here, and the claim says that Professor Vitt got to Long Beach City College today by flapping his arms and flying through the sky. So I started, in the Inland Empire, and I flapped all the way to Long Beach. Now that would be an extraordinary claim. That would be something that you probably don't see every day. Humans don't normally fly. So that would be something that you would really, you probably, if someone wanted to just tell you a story about that and say, yeah, I saw him fly in here, he did great, you wouldn't believe them, right? You'd say, well, look, that's pretty crazy. I need a little more evidence than just you telling me that you did that. I believe that you saw that. I believe you. It's just that the claim itself is so unusual. I'd need to see a little more evidence, right? Even if that person was really honest, we might think, well, you probably got tricked. Professor Vitt was flying in on a wire or something like that. And the book, you'll find, talks about this with regard to meteorites, that a couple of hundred years ago, I guess a few hundred years ago now, they always change it on me. Right? That's how old I am. Every couple hundred years I have to update my stories. But no, a couple of hundred years ago, scientists just didn't believe that meteorites fell to the ground. And there's a great quote from Jefferson after a couple of professors from Harvard actually saw a meteorite hit the earth and then land. They went and investigated, and Jefferson said, "I could more easily believe that two Yankee professors would lie than stones would fall down from heaven." So it's just kind of a good little quote there. The idea that, gosh, you're probably going to be, I would need to see more than just someone telling me a story to believe that. So suppose I say, okay, you're not going to believe my word for it or someone's word for it that Professor Vitt got to campus by flying, just waving his arms. Let me show you a video I took of it. And so, a video might be a little bit better here. It surely could be faked or photoshopped, something like that, or CGI'd, but might be easier for us to detect those types of alterations in the video, so that we'd have a little bit more of an evidence trail there. We could see whether or not, I was airbrushed in or something like that. Also, it might be nice if the video had a chain of custody. So someone says, here's my phone. I took the video with my phone. You could look at it immediately, and then we would know, okay, we could look at the file and see whether there's any metadata and whether or not that was a legitimate video or something like that. So a video might be helpful. What if, though, the evidence was something that we could touch, right? So evidence of my ability to fly would be something like X-rays or an inspection of my arms and chest muscles, and they discover, oh my gosh, the physical evidence is really overwhelming. He has really dense muscle fiber and he has hollow bones, and this allows him to fly or something like that. Or maybe the evidence would be that I had on a jetpack, and that jetpack explains how I could presumably look like I'm flying. So physical evidence is always good. It helps to corroborate when we need different kinds of evidence. And again, but now suppose this evidence was that I could repeat this feat, that I could fly anytime somebody asked me to. So somebody said, hey, you don't believe that he flew here? Watch him. And then I would go off and fly, right? That would be great, because then we could take me and we could set me up in a laboratory, and everybody could put cameras on me, and we could get all kinds of detections going on, and I could reproduce the effect anytime that I wanted. That would be pretty good evidence for the claim that Professor Vitt can fly by flapping his arms. And what you notice here is, as I've gone through these different kinds of evidence, whether the evidence would be repeatable or touchable or viewable on a video, I'm showing you that they can be, different kinds of evidence are better. And when somebody makes an extraordinary claim, you're going to want as good evidence as possible, right? You want it to be as good as possible. Regarding repeatability, this is just a little side note. You don't need to know it necessarily right now, but one thing about repeatability that's really good is that it's great for science. So if a scientist off in Sweden thinks that they've conducted this experiment properly and it's a big breakthrough, someone in South Africa can do the same thing. Someone in Beijing could, in theory, model those same conditions and conduct the same experiment. That helps to keep fraud down. So you can see how, if I could always flap my arms and fly, the fact that I could do that repeatedly would make it less likely that I'm committing fraud or someone is mistaken, right? So just an important side note about science. So kind of a side point to that extraordinary claim, extraordinary evidence, is just the idea that the stronger the evidence that we have is, the more faith we can put in the conclusion. So if all you have is a story that I can fly to Long Beach City College, well, you're not going to put much confidence in that conclusion, right? Because the evidence isn't very good. So, that would be maybe just a story. But then if we had a video or a photo, that might be a little better, depending upon, whether we have a chain of custody, what the quality of the video is like, when it was taken, so forth. That would be a little better. So we'd maybe be a little more confident in it. And then, repeatability would be a great hallmark for evidence. And if I could literally fly on command whatever somebody asked me to, then we would have great reason to, be confident in that claim because I could repeat it at any time. So just to keep that in mind. These are things that you kind of run on these rules already somewhat, but this is just a little brush up. Okay, next principle we're going to cover. There are really two of them. We're going to cover Occam's razor first and then the reductio. So don't worry about that word yet. Let's just talk about Occam's razor. Occam's razor is a principle of reasoning, and it's based upon a medieval logician, William of Occam, who actually never wrote it. He never penned this principle himself, but it's given, his name. So I would like that as a gig. If somebody can come up with an indispensable principle of thought and put my name on it, and I never have to actually write this thought out, then let me know. That would be a great gig. It's a joke. Occam's razor is basically the claim that the simplest explanation is the best one. So you don't need to have a very convoluted theory if a very simple one will do already. So let me give you an application of this. Suppose that you're sitting in your living room in Long Beach and you hear, if you do live in Long Beach, and you hear hooves outside. So you hear hooves running outside the, outside in the yard or something like that. Now, what are you going to think is more likely? Is it more likely that it's a zebra out there zipping around, or is it more likely that it's a horse? Right? What's going to be the more simple explanation? Well, if it's a zebra, that would be unusual, right? Because we're how do I put it? If it's a zebra, then you have something of a problem. How did that zebra get there, right? I mean, if there was a zebra sanctuary or something like that in Long Beach, then you might think that's the more simple explanation. But what we know is that horses are far more common in North America, right, in Long Beach, than zebras are. There are just more of them around. So it's going to be more simple to assume that a horse made the sound rather than a zebra. Because if you assume a zebra did, then you've got a story to tell, which is how the heck did that zebra get out there? A horse would be, maybe it's a police horse or something and it ran away, or, it was just a horse that was on the back of a trailer and the trailer opened at a red light and the horse came in. I mean, who knows? But the horse is the more simple explanation. Okay, so let's apply this to an example. Suppose I do a card trick and I show you a deck of cards. I ask you to pick a card, but don't tell me what it is. So you pick a card after looking through the deck and you select the King of Spades. And I say, okay, now put the card back in there and shuffle the deck really good so I don't know which one it was. And I'm going to tell you which card it was. So you do that, you shuffle and you do your whole bit. And then at the end of it, I hold up the card and I say, aha, it's the King of Spades. Now, what is more simple, right? What is the easiest explanation here? That I am actually legitimately a magician. I can see things. I could see it in your mind. I could see the card in your mind when you looked at it, or I've got some kind of a trick. And maybe the way that I handed you the cards, I marked all of them, or I marked that card, or I handed it to you in a way that forced you to pick that card or something like that. What's more simple? I tricked you? I tricked you, or I actually have some kind of psychic power. I'm sorry, I use those icons in reverse, right? Well, the more simple explanation would be that I tricked you. Because if I do have, right, that I tricked you down here, but if I do have some kind of magic power, it just seems like, wow, that would be unusual. You are a legitimate sorcerer. You're some kind of wizard who can see things. That would be unusual. And so card tricks are not so unusual, but being able to see something in somebody else's mind is. So the more simple explanation here would be that I tricked you, right? So there are going to be examples like this on the test where you'll see what's more simple, right? Let's run through just a couple more. I take a poll. I'm up in Mount Baldy or something, and I take a quick, or the Angeles National Forest, and I take a blurry photo, a blurry Polaroid of a creature. What's going to be more simple explanation for the blurry black blotch on my screen? That it's a black bear that I just couldn't get into focus, or that it's a Bigfoot living in the Angeles National Forest? Well, the more simple explanation is it would be a bear, right? Because bears are likely to be in forests. But Bigfoot would be less simple because we'd have to explain a lot about what Bigfoot is and how Bigfoot managed to escape and live for thousands of years without us ever finding so much as a scrap of his skin or bone or tooth or anything. So between these two explanations, the bear would be more simple. Now, this does not hold for every sighting involving Bigfoot. It doesn't. But it's just to illustrate the principle, right? So it's not always going to be that way. In order to make a proper explanation here, you're going to need to go through the whole checklist. So when you ask what's more simple, Bigfoot or a bear, we're only talking about Occam's razor. I hope that helps. Okay, so you can imagine another example where we're looking at some kind of light in the sky, and we're near campus, or we're right by the airport, and I ask, gosh, what's more simple? That's a plane that's shining a light, or it's some kind of flying saucer? Well, you know, all other things being equal, it's going to be the plane, right? Not the flying saucer, because we know planes exist. We can see them all over the place. And if we go to the airport during the day, we can see them all on the ground, right? Taking off and landing. Whereas we wouldn't be seeing, presumably, flying saucers during the day. So the more simple explanation is that the light is a plane or something rather than a flying saucer. Okay. Now we're going to talk about the reductio. This term comes from Latin, and it means reduced to the absurd. So you kind of reduce something to a ridiculous claim. Let me read the book definition, and then we'll talk about it a little bit and give some examples. The first one is, let's just give the book definition. If a claim results in an impossible consequence, then it is likely incorrect. So you notice, I've got a picture here of Wile E. Coyote, and you notice how he just runs straight off the cliff? He's kind of gone too far, right? That's what a reductio is. It's when you push a claim so far logically that it becomes absurd. So you want to push the claim as far as it can go logically. Let me show you an example of the reductio. Some people claim that we never landed on the moon, that the moon landing was a hoax. So you'd have, if that's true, right, assume the moon landing was a hoax. Now we're going to push that claim as far as it will go logically. If it's true that the moon landing was a hoax, then all the moon rocks that were brought back are faked. So that would be tremendously difficult to do. You would have to try to find meteorites from the moon on Earth and then arrange them in such a way that you've convinced people that they've landed or that they've been taken from the moon. Now, that wouldn't be impossible, but it would be hard, right? That would be tough to fake all those moon rocks brought back. Another problem, if we assume that landing on the moon was a hoax, who the heck is transmitting the data from the moon? We still have seismic sensors up there on the moon, if you can believe it, from Apollo, and they're sending back data that scientists use in other models. So the data that we get back from the moon gets used elsewhere in these sort of predictive models, I think involving tides or something like that. So if the moon landing is a hoax, someone is transmitting data from the moon to Earth, and they've been doing it for, 50 years or so. So that's bizarre. That would be a ludicrous thing. And then lastly, suppose the moon landing was a hoax, so everyone involved in the Apollo landing was lying. Everyone was in on it. Everybody at Houston, Mission Control all of those guys were lying. All the engineers who worked on them were lying, and so forth. It just seems very hard to believe. Now, this is not the entire story when it comes to the moon landing, not by a long shot. The focus here is pretty narrow. And what we're doing is we're just saying, well, if this is true, let's push this all the way, as far as we can, and what's going to result from it. This is just a brief example, just like they were with the Occam's razor, right? They're just meant to be simple explanations of the principle. It's not the entire story. Okay. Another example, some people for 9/11 claim that 9/11 was some sort of conspiracy. So I alluded to this earlier in the presentation, and the idea is that there are varying theories, but one of them involves the Pentagon and whether or not the Pentagon was actually hit by a plane. People who look at the photos of the Pentagon feel that they were doctored up, or they don't show damage that you would expect to find from an airplane. One example of this is the wreckage that's in front of the Pentagon as the fire department pulls up and starts to try to put out the fire in the Pentagon. People are taking pictures, and this is a very famous picture. There's a 9/11 conspiracy theorist, Jim Hansen, who claims that when he looks at this wreckage, this right here is very, very conspicuous to him. And he claims that this yellowish stuff is a liana jungle vine from a plane crash in 1995 that took place in the South American jungle. So he claims, look, this wreckage is a plant. This is literally a fraud. This is not wreckage from the plane that crashed into the building. And the reason I know this is that this right here, this little bit of debris, is not insulation from the building. This yellow stuff is not yellow insulation that's inside the building. This is part of a vine that had grown on the wreckage in the jungle. And when they placed the wreckage here on the lawn, they didn't remove the vine. So that is the claim that he makes. So, you know, if we then apply this principle, right, we want to push this all the way. If this is a plant, if this wreckage is a plant, then the following would have to be true. Someone went to a jungle after the wreckage had cooled, at least, and waited some time until the wreckage had been grown over by vines. They'd taken this wreckage from the middle of a South American jungle and transported it to Washington, D.C., a distance of several hundred miles. Now, presumably they did this sometime after it crashed in 95. So we're talking several years would elapse, and they take this wreckage and move it to Washington, D.C. Well, so this kind of seems strange, right? They're asking you to believe that this is a piece of vine on a wrecked ship, an wrecked airship, that they've stored and kept and transported hundreds of miles, but for some reason, it never occurred to them to take the vine off of the wreckage. That, in other words, that they're going to go through all the trouble of moving this wreckage and doing all this stuff, but they're going to leave the vine on the plane, right? That part's going to be there. In fact, we're going to arrange the vine in such a way that it'll be a perfect spot for someone to take a picture and get that vine in there, right? That seems ridiculous. It seems like it's a claim that is reduced to the absurd. If I'm going to go to all this trouble and I'm going to kill all these people, I'm going to attack the Pentagon, I'm going to move tons of wreckage around, I'm going to do all this stuff, but I'm not going to take the time to clean it off. No, that doesn't seem right. By the way, you can also run this argument on Occam's razor. I didn't do it here, but you could. You could say, here's the yellow stuff. What's the most simple explanation? They're 6-year-old vines from the jungle. Were there airplane insulation? Well, the most simple explanation by Occam's razor will be the airplane insulation. But remember the difference here. We are assuming, in this case, when we're applying when we're applying the reductio, we assume that this is true, and then we ask what follows from it. So if we assume that this is in fact planted wreckage, that these are in fact vines, what else would have to be true? Well, somebody would have to transport this wreckage several thousand miles, but never take the time to remove the vine from the wreckage. And that seems absurd, right? If they're going to go to all this trouble to move the wreckage, it just seems like it would take a moment to reach down and remove the vine. So it's kind of an odd claim, right? It reduces to an absurdity. And then a different application of that could be Occam's razor, where you say, well, what's the most simple explanation? These are 6-year-old vines from a jungle, or they're airplane insulation. Well, it seems like the most simple explanation would be the airplane insulation. Okay, you guys, that does it for chapters 1 and 2. I would encourage you to read the chapters and review your notes for this lecture before taking the exam. If you have any questions or concerns, please, please, please feel free to email me.